Are you asking this court to order permanent alimony? The judge asked, eyes fixed on the woman. Yes, she replied confidently. I gave him my youth. He owes me comfort. The man standing beside her didn't argue. He simply lowered his head before we continue. Subscribe to the channel because what the judge uncovers in this courtroom today turns this alimony case upside down. The judge flipped through the file slowly. You say you cannot support yourself, she nodded. I haven't worked in years. The judge looked up. Then explain why your bank statements show regular income deposits. The woman froze. The man finally spoke, his voice quiet. Your Honor, I never told anyone. I just kept paying. The judge leaned back, studying both of them. This court, he said calmly, does not reward deception dressed as sacrifice. The room went silent. The judge adjusted the papers once more, then set them down deliberately. Let's slow this down, he said. Because alimony is not a reward and it is not a weapon. It exists for one purpose only, to prevent unfair hardship. He turned to the woman. You told this court you have no income. Yes, she replied quickly. I depend on him. The judge lifted one page from the file. This statement shows monthly deposits for the past 18 months. Consistent amounts. Same source. Her attorney shifted in his seat. The woman swallowed. That's freelance work. Small things, the judge repeated. Enough to cover rent, utilities, and discretionary spending. She hesitated. Sometimes the judge nodded slowly. Interesting. He turned to the man. Sir, how much alimony have you been paying since the separation? 70% of my income, the man answered quietly. A murmur moved through the courtroom. And your current living situation? The judge asked. I rent a single room, he said. I sold my car last year. I walk to work. The judge's eyes narrowed. Yet you continued to pay without filing for modification. The man nodded. I didn't want to fight. I thought if I just kept my head down, things would settle. The woman scoffed. That was his choice. The judge looked at her sharply. Choice implies equal knowledge. He believed you were unable to support yourself. She crossed her arms. I sacrificed my career for our marriage. The judge leaned forward. How long were you married? 5 years. And how long have you been separated? 4. So you are asking this court to order permanent support for a marriage that lasted barely longer than its aftermath. Her attorney stood. Your Honor, contribution is not measured only in years. My client maintained the home, supported. The judge raised a hand. I am aware of the argument. He turned back to the financial records. What concerns this? Court is not the request. It is the concealment. The woman's voice sharpened. I didn't conceal anything. The judge slid another document forward. These are tax filings. Your income was reported under a different classification. Not illegal, but intentionally. Misleading in family court. The room grew still. The man looked up for the first time, disbelief on his face. You knew? He asked quietly. She avoided his eyes. The judge spoke before she could respond. This court does not punish ambition. It does not punish recovery. But it does not tolerate dishonesty, especially when it keeps one party impoverished. He turned to the man again. Sir, why didn't you speak up sooner? The man took a breath. Because every time I tried, I was told I was lucky to still be allowed to work, that men are supposed to pay. The judge nodded slowly. That assumption ends here. He straightened in his chair. Alimony is meant to lift someone to stability, not to push another into hardship. The woman shook her head. You're taking his side. No, the judge replied calmly. I'm taking the law's side. He picked up his pen. This court finds that the alimony request was based on incomplete and misleading information. The instead said. Woman's attorney opened his mouth, then stopped. Effective immediately. The judge continued, the current alimony order is suspended. The woman stood abruptly. You can't do that. The judge's voice remained level. I can and I am. He looked directly at her. Furthermore, this court orders a full financial reassessment. Any overpayments made during the period of misrepresentation will be credited. Asterisk, the man's breath caught, and the judge added, this court strongly advises both parties to understand something. He paused, letting the room settle. Support is not owed forever. Respect is not optional, and silence is not consent. The gavel came down softly, but the impact was unmistakable. As of today, the judge said, this court will no longer enforce imbalance disguised as fairness. Court was adjourned. The man remained standing, stunned not by victory, but by relief. For the first time since the divorce, the weight on his shoulders began to lift. Asterisk, the courtroom did not empty immediately. People stayed in their seats, as if something unfinished still lingered in the air. The woman remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides, staring at the judge as though waiting for him to reconsider. The man sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. The judge noticed all of it. He did not rise. Instead, he looked back down at the file and spoke again, his voice calm but deliberate. Before anyone leaves, he said, this court is not finished. Everyone froze. The woman's attorney turned back. Your Honor? The judge nodded. Alimony cases do not exist in isolation. They tell a story about power, dependency, and honesty. And this story, he said, tapping the file, deserves to be completed on the record. He turned to the woman. You said you sacrificed your career. Tell the court exactly what you gave up. She took a breath. I stopped working full-time. I supported him emotionally. I managed the home. Asterisk, the judge nodded once. And before. The marriage? I had a degree, entry-level work. And after the separation? She hesitated again. I found ways to survive. The judge leaned back. You didn't just survive. You adapted. You earned. You rebuilt. She frowned. So now I'm being punished for that? No, the judge replied. You are being held accountable for hiding it. He turned to the man. Sir, during these 4 years, did you ever miss a payment? Not once, the man answered. Even when you couldn't afford it? Yes. The judge looked directly at him. Why? Asterisk, the man swallowed. Because every time I imagined stopping, I imagined being called selfish. Or cruel. I didn't want to be that man. The judge's expression softened slightly. And what did that cost you? The man hesitated, then spoke honestly. My health. I lost weight. I stopped seeing friends. I avoided medical checkups because I couldn't afford them. The courtroom was silent again. The judge turned back to the woman. Did you know any of this? She shook her head. He never told me. He didn't tell you, the judge said, because the system taught him silence was expected. He straightened. This court will not reinforce that lesson. The woman's attorney spoke cautiously. Your Honor, are you suggesting further orders beyond suspension? I am, the judge said plainly. The woman stiffened. Asterisk, the judge continued. This court orders both parties to attend a financial transparency hearing. All sources of income will be disclosed, no exceptions. He looked directly at the woman. Failure to comply will result in sanctions. Her jaw tightened. This is humiliating. The judge met her gaze. So is poverty caused by deception? He turned to the man again. Sir, this court also orders retroactive consideration of hardship. If overpayment is confirmed, restitution will be addressed. The man's eyes filled with tears, though he tried to hide them. "I didn't come here for money," he said. Quietly, "I just wanted fairness." The judge nodded. "Fairness often arrives late, but it arrives." He paused, then added, "There is one more thing this court must say." Everyone leaned in. "Alimony is not a lifetime identity," the judge said. "It is a bridge. And bridges are not meant to be lived on." Asterisk, the woman looked down, her confidence finally gone. "You are capable," the judge told her. "And capability comes with responsibility." He raised the gavel again, but this time did not strike it immediately. "This court encouraged both of you to leave this case not as enemies, but as people released from roles that no longer serve you." He brought the gavel down. "Now," he said, "court is adjourned." This time people did stand. The woman gathered her papers slowly, her expression conflicted, part anger, part realization. The man remained seated for a moment longer, his shoulders finally dropping as if he had been holding them up for years. When he stood, it wasn't with triumph. It was with relief. For the first time since the divorce, the law had not asked him to suffer quietly, it had listened. And in doing so, it had restored something he thought he'd lost forever, not money, not pride, but dignity. Asterisk. The weeks that followed did not feel like victory. They felt like exposure, the financial transparency. Hearing arrived faster than either of them expected. The courtroom was smaller this time, quieter, almost clinical. No spectators. No murmurs. Just files, figures, and facts. The woman sat straighter than before, but the confidence she once carried was brittle now. In front of her lay bank statements, freelance contracts, digital payment histories, documents she never imagined would be read aloud in open court. The judge entered without ceremony. "Let's proceed," he said. One by one, the numbers surfaced. Side. Income, consulting work, online tutoring. Short-term contracts paid in increments, just small enough to avoid attention, but consistent enough to build stability. Asterisk, the courtroom clerk read them neutrally, without judgment. The damage did not come from tone, it came from truth. The man listened silently, hands folded. Each figure felt like a confirmation of something he had sensed, but never allowed himself to accuse. The judge finally looked up. "These earnings," he said, "do not eliminate the right to support, but concealing them alters the scale." The hindernits das. Woman's attorney tried to recover. "Your Honor, these were inconsistent earnings, survival income." The judge nodded. Survival income becomes material when it's systematic. He turned to the woman. "Why didn't you disclose this?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I admitted I could stand on my own, I'd lose the only safety net I had." The judge leaned forward slightly. "And did it ever occur to you that your safety net was someone else's burden?" Her eyes flickered. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't want to think of it that way." Asterisk, the judge's voice was firm, but not cruel. Avoiding a thought does not erase its consequences. He reviewed the file again. Based on the evidence, this court finds that alimony payments exceeded equitable necessity for the past 18 months. The man's breath caught. The judge continued. "Restitution will not be immediate, but adjustment is mandatory." He paused, then added something unexpected. "This court also recommends mediation, not reconciliation, but closure." Unresolved. Resentment has a way of poisoning compliance. The woman looked up sharply. Why would he agree to that? The judge answered before the man could. "Because fairness is easier to accept when it is witnessed." The man finally spoke. "I don't want revenge. I just don't want to feel erased." The woman looked at him then not as an opponent, but as someone she once knew. The realization unsettled her more than the ruling. The judge concluded. "Payments. A reduced effective immediately. A review will follow in 6 months." Asterisk he struck the gavel. As they left the courtroom. They did not speak, but for the first time, neither felt invisible. That night, the man slept without calculating bills in his head. The woman sat alone, staring at her laptop, realizing that independence once feared was already hers, and that realization carried weight. 6 months later. The courtroom felt different. Not quieter. Clearer. The man walked in with steadier steps. He looked healthier. Not triumphant, just no longer worn down. He had resumed medical care, reconnected with friends, and started planning instead of surviving. The woman entered moments later. She looked composed, professional even. She had not missed a single mediation session. She had complied fully. And somewhere along the way, resistance had turned into acceptance. The judge reviewed the updated reports. Asterisk. Both parties have complied, he said. That is not always the case. He looked at the woman. Your income has increased. Yes, she replied. I formalized my work, took ownership of it. And do you still require the same level of support? She shook her head. No. The word landed heavier than any argument. The judge turned to the man. Has the adjustment improved your condition? Yes, he answered. Not just financially, the judge nodded. That is the purpose of equity, not to choose sides, but to restore balance. He folded his hands. This court terminates alimony effective today. No gasp. No protest. Just silence. The woman exhaled slowly. I didn't think this day would feel like relief, she said, almost to herself. But it does. Asterisk the judge met her eyes. Because dignity is not taken from you when support ends. It is returned when dependence becomes choice. He looked at both of them. You came here bound by a past arrangement that no longer reflected reality. You leave unbound. He paused, then added, remember this. The law can order payments, but it cannot order respect. That must be chosen. The gavel came down for the final time. Outside the courtroom, they stood briefly, unsure whether to speak. I never wanted to hurt you, the woman said at last. I know, the man replied, but not knowing doesn't stop the damage. She nodded. I see that now. They parted without bitterness, not as friends, not as enemies, just as two people released from a story that had gone on too long. Asterisk. And for the first time since the divorce papers were signed, both walked away light or not. Because one had won, but because the truth had finally been allowed to finish speaking.